Mhm. Amen. Well, let's just go for it let's just go for it. We were at the end of chapter 32. We heard Moses' song. Oh yeah. So here, let's just do this real quick. So last week I highlighted this really amazing literary structure to the whole of the Torah, which has got the five books right here. And I highlighted the fact that there are three large poems or blocks of poems at the end of the first book, in the center, and then near the end of the last book. Do you remember the phrase that all of these is connected with? Yeah, it's good old Hal Lindsey, end of the world type of stuff. But that's not what this phrase means. What it means is all these poems were pitching forward, saying the plot tensions, the themes, the promises raised at all the key parts of this story are all future pointing. They'll find their resolution not here within the story itself, but some future point of the story. So we looked at those last week, and so the last poem, big poetic block in Deuteronomy, is made of two poems. One we read last week, chapter 32. The second is what we're going to look at today, chapter 33, and then there's a little short conclusion where Moses crawls up on a mountain and dies. But do you remember the first large poetic block? Who was it? Who was speaking to whom in Genesis 49? Do you remember? It's Jacob. Yep. So he's on his deathbed, literally on his deathbed. And he says, "Let's gather together, my sons, so I can tell you what will happen at the end of days." And he pronounces a blessing, right, on each of the sons who will become the tribes. And so, as if to match that, here's Moses about to crawl up onto a mountain and die. And what he does is he does another blessing, this time not on the sons, but on the actual tribes. So there's a cool symmetry even to the blessing of the 12 sons and now the blessing of the tribes in the first and last blocks of these poems. So let's start off with, at the end of 32, this is where we stopped last week, verse 48 is where we're going to start. So on that same day, Yahweh told Moses, "Go up into the Avarim range to Mount Nebo in Moab, across from Jericho, and view Canaan, the land that I am giving the Israelites as their possession. There on the mountain that you have climbed, you will die, and be gathered to your people, just as your brother Aaron died on Mount Hor and was gathered to his people. This was because both of you broke faith with me in the presence of the Israelites at the waters of Meribah, Kadesh in the desert of Zin, because you did not uphold my holiness among the Israelites." Do you remember that story? Numbers chapter 20. Close. It was very close. So yeah, that was that long, difficult, depressing stretch we had in the wilderness stories of Numbers. And so all of the people rebel, and then the last story is actually of Moses and Aaron's own rebellion, although it was a puzzling story, but we won't get into that again. Verse 52, "Therefore you will see the land only from a distance. You will not enter the land I am giving to the people of Israel." Now, just to remind us here about what we're talking about. So this is just Google Maps, sorry. So here we've got Dead Sea down here. We've got the Sea of Galilee or the Lake of Galilee up here. Here's Jerusalem. So this whole central land on this west side between the two bodies of water, this is the heart of the land of Canaan. That's connected with the promises to Abraham. And then Israel, has traveled up through this wilderness here, up around this side, and then this is the region of Moab, and then Mount Nebo is this little dot right here. And remember, the Dead Sea is one of the lowest places on planet Earth. It's like, a couple thousand feet below sea level. And so just one picture from Mount Nebo so you can get the idea here. Yeah. So this is, Mount, we're not on Mount Hood, but this is really tall. It's really, and it's tall mostly because of the valley that stretches out. So you're standing here, and you're looking west. And so this is the northern tip of the Dead Sea right here. And then deep in this valley is there's the Jordan River, right, flowing in this valley. And then over here are what are called the hills of Judea. And actually, the kooks who withdrew to the Dead Sea Scroll, kooky guys, because they were religious kooks for sure. I suppose we are too. I don't know. Anyway, their whole little monastery that they withdrew was in this kind of northern region right here, tucked into the hills, up from the sea. Anyway, so this is the land of Canaan. This is the view from Mount Nebo. You can go there today. There's a monastery and a church there. I think they have like a big memorial stone for Moses. And the view is absolutely incredible. So that's the idea here. It's quite a vista. So Moses goes up, he sees the land stretched out before him, and we're told this. Okay, chapter 33. So he's got the tribes, or the leaders of the tribes. You can see the land. It's this epic. I'm trying to paint this as an epic final scene. This is like his final wishes, something like that. Chapter 33. This is the blessing that Moses, the man of God, pronounced on the Israelites before his death. He said, Yahweh came from Sinai, and he dawned over them from Seir. He shone forth from Mount Paran. These are all places. So Sinai is obviously the big mountain that nobody quite knows where it is, way down here in the Sinai Peninsula. And so they journeyed up, and those two other places, Seir and Mount Paran, are different key places where Israel has journeyed on their wilderness down here from Sinai all the way up here to where they are right now. So Yahweh came to them at Sinai, and he has continued to shine his light over them in their journey through the wilderness. He came with myriads of holy ones, so with his angelic host even, from the south, from his mountain slopes. Surely it is you who love the people, and all the holy ones are in your hand. At your feet they all bow down, and from you they receive instruction. This seems to be retelling the whole story of Yahweh making a covenant with his people. So his presence came down on Sinai. It's been with them all through the desert. Yahweh loves his people. He's sworn in covenant love to them, and he's given them instruction, and his people come and receive it. What is the instruction? Verse 4. It's the law. Hebrew word for law? Torah. The Torah. Here it is. What is the instruction that he's given his people? The Torah that Moses gave us. The possession of the assembly of Jacob. So remember at the end of 31, God told Moses, write down the laws of the Torah that you've received, and write down the song, and he wrote it in a scroll. I called it the Proto-Torah, right? The beta version of the Torah. And so he's passed that on to his people. So it's the Torah that Moses gave us. And then verse 5, NIV has in verse 5, he was king over Jeshurun. How many of you have that? Verse 5. He was king. Now, if you look at that, he was king. Who was king? If you're looking in the context. Who's king? That's kind of a puzzle, isn't it? You're like, well, who is the last he that was mentioned? Moses. Yeah. Is Moses ever depicted as a king or called a king? Who's the only person depicted as king over Israel in the Torah? So Yahweh. So this is, dude, welcome to ancient biblical poetry. And it will not get any easy for you in the Psalms or in the prophets. Just the speakers will shift. You'll be talking to somebody in second person, but then you're talking to Yahweh as you, but then all of a sudden he, talking about him in the third person, then you go back to you. It's a feature of ancient biblical poetry that is maddening for readers, because you're like, who is talking about who right now? I have no idea what's happening. But it forces you to reread the poem. So I think it's a shift. We were talking about you, love the people, you gave the Torah, but now we're talking about Yahweh, I'm pretty certain. Yahweh, he was or became king over Yeshurun. Yeshurun was that kind of punny name for Israel, because it means the upright one. And clearly by the end of the Torah, that's not how we are viewing the people. So Yahweh was king over Israel when the leaders of the people assembled along with the tribes of Israel. And then here we go into these blessings. Reuben. May Reuben live and not die, nor his men be few. That's as good of a blessing as you could ever want, I suppose. I want to live, I don't want to die, and I want my tribe to have lots of people. Okay, there you go. Reuben, it's kind of a minimal blessing. This he said about Judah. Hear, Yahweh, the cry of Judah. Bring him to his people. With his own hands he defends his cause. Oh, be his help against his foes. So Judah, you'll remember, is the tribe that is from which David is going to come. It's going to be the tribe of royal leadership and so on. So it's this blessing that God give him victory as he defends and defeats his foes and so on. Levi. About Levi, he said, your Thummim and your Urim belong to the man whom you have favored. Do you remember the Thummim and Urim? They're bizarre. It's strange. It's ancient sacred dice, right? It's these stones that were kept in the golden pouch. I'm sorry. It's these special dice kept in the golden pouch of the priest. And we don't know what to do, Yahweh. Roll the sacred dice. It's strange. It's strange. To us, it's strange. It was not strange to them. And it was a cultural practice not only among Israel and other cultures, and Yahweh adapted to where the people were at and honored this practice and used it to guide his people. Bible, I'm telling you. So Levi, as the priesthood, is the tribe that guards this means of communication from Yahweh. So your Urim and Thummim, they belong to the man you favored. You tested him at Massah. You contended with him at the waters of Meribah. So there were these rebellions in the desert. Which tribe among the tribes, which tribe among all of the tribes proved faithful to Yahweh time and again despite the rebellions in the wilderness? Or even think the golden calf story. Which tribe was faithful to Yahweh in the golden calf story? So it was the tribe of Levi. And they were faithful, and particularly through violent elimination of idolatry and of the idolaters on Mount Sinai. And then again, you remember after Balaam, the Balaam story, Balaam introduced the Israelites to all of these Moabite sacred temple prostitutes. That story didn't go well. And then who was it? It was a Levite, Phinehas, who came and speared those two people and so on. And so it was the tribe of Levi that remained faithful to Yahweh despite Israel's idolatry, which is what verse 9 means. Because he said of his father and mother, I have no regard for them. He didn't recognize his brothers or acknowledge his children. He watched over your word and guarded your covenant. So this doesn't mean that Levi are man-haters. Levites are man-haters or something. The point was that key moments when all of Israel turned away, they were loyal to Yahweh instead of to what their own kinsmen were doing. So what are the priests supposed to do? Here's what they're supposed to do. He, that is the tribe of Levi, the priests and so on, he teaches your precepts to Jacob and your Torah to Israel. He offers incense before you and whole burnt offerings on your altar. So this is what priests do. And actually, look at verse 10. This is a great condensed description of a priest. So the priests were to teach God's instruction to the people, and then they were to represent the people before God with offerings. That's that mediating role, God to people, and then people back to God. Did the priests end up actually being faithful to this call? The tribe of Levi was faithful in the wilderness. Did they continue to be faithful? Answer is no. You could almost predict that one was going to happen. So Malachi, this is what he has to say. He's pretty ticked at the priests. And this is way down the line, hundreds and hundreds of years down the line. And this is Malachi's indictment against the priests. He says, the lips of a priest ought to preserve knowledge, because he's the messenger of Yahweh Almighty. People seek instruction from his mouth. But you all have turned from the way, and by your teaching you have caused many to stumble. You violated the covenant with Levi, says Yahweh Almighty, and so I have caused you to be despised and humiliated. Before all the people you have not followed my way, but you've shown partiality in matters of the Torah. So this is just one of many accusations that the prophets make against the priests. So who is supposed to be the guardians of the Torah? So the priests. And where did Moses, remember, he puts his proto-Torah together, and where did he put it? So he put it along with the ark that goes in the tabernacle and then into the temple, and that's taken care of by priests. So this is interesting. So the Torah is supposed to be guarded and protected and taught by the priesthood, but every indication that we have of once you read through the history of Israel is that was totally never done at all, like never ever done. So much so that by 500 years after Moses, there are some priests cleaning the temple one day, and they find a scroll. Oh, what's this scroll? What is this? And they take it, and they're like, we have no idea what this thing is, right? It's crazy. And where do they go? Do you remember this story? This is actually a really key story. 2 Kings, 23, 22. Oh, there you go. Yeah. 2 Kings 22. The book of the Torah is found. So these guys, priests cleaning the temple, they find the scroll. They take it to the king, and the king's like, I don't know what this thing is. And so where do they go? This is really significant. Where do they go? Scrolling down the story, because this is just so cool. Yes. Yeah, right here. So Hilkiah the priest, Ahikam, Akbor, Shaphan, Asaiah, all these great boy names, right? Where did they go? They went to go speak to the prophet Huldah, the wife of Shalom Tikvah, who when all of God's people, even the priesthood, has forgotten about the Torah and what it means, who is still there reliable to go to know God's will, to interpret the Torah? This prophetess Huldah, which is also a great girl name, by the way. So we should bring it back. So even though the priests were supposed to be the guardians of Torah, they abandoned it, and it actually became the prophets who became these protectors of the scriptures. And that's why, as we're going to see in just a second here, as soon as you finish the Torah, you're told the history of Israel and how they failed so miserably, and then the next main block, the next other major block of literature that corresponds to the Torah is the books of the prophets, that in terms of length are almost as equal as a total to the length of the Torah itself. And so this is the whole key. The prophets abandoned their post, and the priests abandoned their post, and the prophets become the protectors of Torah. And so the Hebrew Bible has two big blocks, Torah and prophets, and they are meant to go together. Isn't that interesting? Verse 11. Sorry, back to Deuteronomy 3, verse 11. So Levi, he's supposed to teach and make offerings. Verse 11. Bless all his skills, O Yahweh. Be pleased with the work of his hands. Smite the loins of those who rise up against him. Strike his foes till they rise no more. Just smite their loins. Verse 12. Benjamin. About Benjamin he said, let the beloved of Yahweh rest secure in him, for he shields him all day long, and the one Yahweh loves rests between his shoulders. Benjamin, in birth order, where does he come? He's last, yeah. And you remember the whole Joseph story. He's the most beloved of Jacob and doesn't want to let Benjamin go, and so on. So it's this very unique blessing about there's something special, beloved about this tribe. May Yahweh shield him. You notice all of these are basically prayers and blessings of protection, of victory, of success. Because where are they going? Right, they're going into the land, and there's going to be all of these nations that are against them that they have to fight with and so on. So their existence is still precarious at this point, and so it's all these blessings for protection and success. About Joseph, verse 13, he said, may Yahweh bless his land with the precious dew from heaven above, with the deep waters that lie below, with the best that the sun brings forth and the finest the moon can yield, with the choicest gifts of the ancient mountains and the fruitfulness of everlasting hills, with the best gifts of the earth and its fullness, and the favor of the one who dwelt in the burning bush. Who's that? This is Yahweh. This is the only other reference to the burning bush in the Bible. Isn't that interesting? There's the story itself in Exodus 3, and then there's this description right here, this reference right here to that story. And this is the only time God is ever called by this name, the one who was there in the middle of that burning bush. Do you want to see something? Where are you going to? Here we go. Our next Bible project video is Exodus. We're going to do Exodus in two parts just because. So this is our scene from the burning bush. It's Moses with his sheep, and then he's in this valley, and then the light from the bush is coming from around the corner. Isn't that rad? And then I saw it last week. One of the animators is animating the turn, and then it'll be awesome. Anyway, so that's the picture. So rad. Anyway, I'm excited about that one. Okay, so the burning bush. Yahweh's called the one who dwells in the bush. No, there's also an irony here. So who provides for his people and his tribes? Who provides from the dew, the waters, the sun, the moon, the mountains, the hills? Who controls all of that? The one who dwells in that bush. It's just this irony, I think, of like this cosmic scope of Yahweh's control, but yet he humbled himself to appear to a shepherd in a bush, kind of reminds me of the Christmas story kind of thing. Let all of these blessings rest on the head of Joseph, on the brow of the prince among his brothers. In majesty, he's like a firstborn bull. His horns are the horns of a wild ox, which is a compliment. That's a compliment, right? So strong ox, big horns, right? You want to be like that. With them he gores the nations, even those at the end of the earth. He'll defeat his foes. Such are the 10,000s of Ephraim with the thousands of Manasseh. About Zebulun, he said, rejoice, Zebulun, in your going out, and you, Issachar, in your tents. They will summon peoples to the mountain, and there offer sacrifices of righteousness. They will feast on the abundance of the seas and on the treasures hidden in the sand. These are such obscure blessings. So, let's see, where were we? Yes. The tribes of Zebulun and Issachar and Naphtali are all up here in the region of Galilee, but on this side over here. So Zebulun and Issachar were the coastal tribes up here, and thus the reference to the seas, like they were the ones that had trading ships, that went to Greece and Cyprus and stuff like that. So may they feast on the abundance of the seas. Verse 20, about Gad, he said, blessed is the one who enlarges Gad's domain. Gad lives there like a lion, tearing at the arm or the head. He chooses the best land for himself. The leader's portion was kept for him. When the heads of the people assembled, he carried out Yahweh's righteous will and his judgments concerning Israel. About Dan, he said, Dan is a lion's cub springing out of Bashan. About Naphtali, he said, Naphtali is abounding with the favor of Yahweh. He is full of his blessing. He will inherit southward to the lake. And the lake here is right here, the Lake of Galilee. And that's exactly Naphtali. Naphtali is actually the region where Nazareth is, right here, where Jesus grew up. Last one, Asher. Most blessed of sons is Asher. Let him be favored by his brothers. Let him bathe his feet in oil. Doesn't that sound relaxing? The bolts of your gates will be iron and bronze, and your strength will equal your days. So you can see each one of these these are hopeful. Man, after all that Moses has been through with these people, really think about it. And I know it was a long time ago that we were in this long, depressing stretch right here in the wilderness. But notice how hopeful he is. Even though he knows exile's coming, right? And he knows that the people are going to turn away, he just utters these prayers of just hopeful blessing. It's a very hopeful note, which is nice that it doesn't end on a total downer, right? But to me, that's what struck me as I was reading through this, is that despite what he's been through with these people, he prays these blessings of hope and success on these people that he's also skeptical about at the same time. All right, last chapter of the Torah. Holy cow, it's happening right now. Then Moses climbed Mount Nebo. This is the last action Moses will perform in the Torah, climbing a mountain. From the plains of Moab to the top of Pisgah, across from Jericho. There Yahweh showed him the whole of the land, that picture that I showed you here. Here we go. From Gilead to Dan, all of Naphtali, the territory of Ephraim and Manasseh, the land of Judah, as far as the western sea, the Negev, the whole region of the valley of Jericho, the city of palms, as far as Zoar. Then Yahweh said to him, "This is the land I promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob when I said, I will give it to your descendants. I've let you see it with your eyes, but you will not cross over it." So notice right here at the end you have this back reference all the way back here to the covenant with Abraham and the land promises and so on. So we're wrapping the whole story together here. Verse 5, "And Moses, the servant of Yahweh, died there in Moab, as the Lord said. He buried him in Moab, in the valley opposite Beit Peor." Now stop right there. Who buried whom? Have you ever noticed that before? This is an odd. Who buried whom? Who's the he? So this is good. This is like the details of doing biblical interpretation. So whenever who's a he or a she, you look back at the previous sentence for the last available noun, right? That could be the subject or the verb. And who was the last person doing anything in the sentence before, as Yahweh had said. So Yahweh buried Moses. What does that mean? That's such an astounding idea, in fact, that in the Septuagint translation so the Jewish scholars living down in Egypt, who 200 years before Jesus turned the whole Hebrew Bible into Greek, they translated this as a passive verb, and Moses was buried, to avoid the idea that Yahweh, what does that even mean? Yahweh buried him. Now notice he buried him in Moab, in the valley opposite Beit Peor, but to this day, nobody knows where his grave is, which is true. There's about 4 different grave sites of Moses. There's actually one on the other side of the Jordan in Israel. And then there's 3 different sites in Jordan. You can go visit them all, and nobody knows, right? And they're certainly all wrong, So nobody knows. Moses was 120 years old when he died. His eyes were not weak, nor his strength gone. And I love the King James on that line, which is, nor his vigor abated. The Israelites grieved for Moses in the plains of Moab 30 days until the time of weeping and mourning was over. Now, Joshua, son of Nun, he was filled with the spirit of wisdom, because Moses had laid his hands on him. And so the Israelites listened to him and did what Yahweh had commanded Moses. So he's filled with a spirit of wisdom. This is new. Well, that's actually not new. We've heard of people being filled by the Spirit to have wisdom one other time in the Torah. Do you remember it? Oh, dang it. What exactly? Sorry, one second. I just have to... 31. Yeah. Yes, okay. Exodus 31. This is in the thick of the tabernacle instructions about building the tabernacle. And Yahweh says to Moses, "Look, I've chosen Bezalel, son of Uri, son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah, and I have filled him with the Spirit of God, with wisdom and understanding and knowledge, and with all kinds of skills." What's the point of what is the result of this guy being filled with God's breath and animating life, resulting in wisdom, he's a rad artist, right? That's the outcome, is he can make all these sculptures and make curtains and rugs and awesome, bronze and gold tubing for the framework of the tents and so on. There you go. What happens when people are filled with the Spirit? In this case, a spirit of wisdom. So in Joshua's case, it's a spirit of wisdom connected with leadership of the people, because look at the result. Moses laid his hands on him, was filled with the spirit of wisdom, and then people listened to this guy. The Israelites listened to him and did what Yahweh commanded Moses. Last paragraph of the Torah. Since then, no prophet has risen in Israel like Moses, whom Yahweh knew face to face, who did all those miraculous signs and wonders the Lord sent him to do in Egypt, to Pharaoh and all his officials in the whole land. For no one has ever shown the mighty power or performed the awesome deeds that Moses did in the sight of all Israel. Now, just stop for a second. So we had the last words of Moses, right? These final poems. And we know these final poems are Let's just pause for a second. So Moses had some key role in writing the material that was what I call the proto-Torah. So there's some version of the Torah before that. The Torah that we have right now has this really beautiful structure to it of these key poems that kind of set apart the macro structure. And all the poems begin with the same phrase. All of them have a figure, gather around me, let me tell you what's going to happen here. And all of them are forward pointing to all of the key themes of the Torah that we'll talk about in a minute. And so someone has architected this whole thing right here, these three poems and overarching the whole of it. But then someone has also attached this story here, all of chapter 34. So who wrote chapter 34? There's no little note that says, here I am, I'm Joshua, or I'm Samuel or something. No, so we don't know. It's anonymous. But it's a narrative about Moses' death. So there's the death story. And then look at this paragraph here, verses 10 through 12. And just look at those first words. Since then, or some of your translations might have, there has never been since a prophet like Moses. Now, who's talking to you right now? Do you see that we've zoomed out of the narrative? The narrative's over. So Moses died, Joshua, people listened to him, story's done. So what is this last little paragraph? Really stop and think about this. It's a narrator. If it were like a movie, this would be like the movie stops, freeze frame. It's like Joshua, ready to lead the people. And then it's like the narrator. Or maybe think of like stories or movies that are like based on a true story. And then the story's over, but then you get a last screen giving you the director or the narrator's commentary. Like, here's the real person, and here's what they're doing today, and they're happy, and this kind of thing. So that's what's happening here right now. It's some narrator who's giving us some little comment here at the end of the story. Now, look closely at verse 10 or verse 12. What is the location in time of this narrator or of this voice who's speaking to you in the final paragraph of the Torah? In other words, where does this voice stand in relationship to the events that are just narrated to you? Do you see what I'm asking here? Does it seem like it happened yesterday? Do you see that there? Yeah, so Israel is still a people. So but clearly this is a voice for whom these events are in the distant past. And what are we saying? What is this voice telling us here? Dear reader, no prophet like Moses has ever come since. Right? Who knew Yahweh face to face, who did all those things. Yeah, there's never, ever been anybody ever like that again. So that's interesting. Why are we being told that information? So is it just to make Moses look awesome? We already know he's the elevated figure in the story. What's happening here? This is very interesting. And this is connected, a prophet like Moses is connected to some words that Moses said earlier on in the book of Deuteronomy, in chapter 18. In Deuteronomy 18, Moses had this whole thing of don't go to the sorcerers, don't practice divination. But here's how Yahweh is going to speak to you. This is in Deuteronomy 18. The nations whom you dispossess, they practice sorcery and divination and so on, not you, Yahweh's people. Yahweh, your God, will raise up for you a prophet like me from among you, your fellow Israelites. You need to listen to that prophet. Hey, remember, this is what you asked on Mount Sinai and so on. So Moses himself said, Yahweh is going to raise up for you a prophet like me. And this little paragraph at the end of the Torah comes around, reminds you that, dear reader, did a prophet like Moses ever come, as far as we can tell? Now, did Israel have prophets and prophetesses? Many. But did any of them ever accomplish another great exodus for Yahweh's people? Nope. No. So this is interesting too. So the last the last words of the Torah have this kind of unfinished note. They reference back to Deuteronomy 18, and they say, dear reader, remember that prophet Moses said would come? Yeah, never came. There's been no prophet like Moses since then. Well, if I wanted to pick up this theme more, where would I go to pick up this idea of the coming prophet? Maybe I should turn to the books of the prophets, perhaps. And here's what's very, very interesting. The last book of the prophets, Malachi. The last how many chapters Malachi have? 4. So go there with me. You will know this as the last page of the Old Testament. Malachi 4. Surely the day is coming. It will burn like a furnace. The arrogant, every evildoer will become stubble, and that day that's coming will set them on fire. So this common metaphor in the prophets of Yahweh's justice coming to judge evil with this image of fire that consumes. Not a root or branch will be left to them. But for those of you who revere my name, the Son of Righteousness will rise with healing in its wings. There's this classic image in the prophets of the day of hope, of the Messiah, of the day of Yahweh, of sunrise. And then what are the wings of the sun? Right, the rays. You know the iconic rays of the sun, right? So, whoosh. And when the rays of the sun, wherever they reach, healing. And you all will go out and leap like calves released from the stall, and you'll trample the wicked. There'll be ashes under the soles of your feet on the day when I do these things, Yahweh Almighty. Remember the Torah of my servant Moses, the decrees and the laws that I gave him at Horeb for all Israel. Now, what just happened? We were talking about the day of Yahweh, weren't we? And like the final judgment, and then all of a sudden it's just like, hey, remember the Torah. You're like, okay, it's hard not to forget it. I mean, we spent, 22 months going through it. I'm not likely to ever forget the Torah. What is that? It's just sort of this little notice like that jumps out of the blue. Day of Yahweh, day of Yahweh, day of Yahweh. Hey, remember the Torah of Moses and the decrees and laws. And then verse 5. See, I will send you the prophet Elijah before the great and dreadful day of Yahweh comes. He will turn the hearts of the fathers to their children and the hearts of the children to their fathers, or else I'll come and strike the land with a curse. Elijah? What's Elijah? Why are we talking about Elijah right now? I thought we were talking about Moses. So two things. Elijah, in terms of Malachi, and I don't assume that you would know this, in terms of the time of Malachi and the timing of Elijah, Elijah's been dead for about 400 years. So we're not talking about Elijah being resurrected here. We're talking about a prophet like Elijah. But this is just like the prophets will say, David will come one day, 400 years after David's dead, and it's a way of talking about the Messiah. A new David will come. So a new Elijah-like prophet. So here's the day of Yahweh, day of Yahweh, day of Yahweh. Hey, don't forget about the Torah and Moses. Now, I'm going to send to you this Elijah-like prophet before the day of Yahweh comes. So can you think of who are the two prophets who went to Mount Sinai? Moses and Elijah. Who are the two prophets who saw Yahweh appear in fire and storm and wind and so on? Elijah and Moses. Who are the two prophets whom Yahweh personally attended to in their departure from planet Earth, right? Who are the prophets who provided food for hungry people in the wilderness? Who was the prophet who journeyed through the wilderness for 40 days and had miraculous food provided for them? Elijah. So there's something really significant. The Elijah narratives are portraying Elijah as a Moses-like prophet, and then who Malachi, or whoever this is speaking to us, picks up and reminds us that there is a Elijah. So we've got a prophet. Here we go. We've got a prophet. Hey, Moses said a prophet like him was coming, yet never came, still waiting. The ending of the prophet says, hey, remember Moses and the Torah? Yahweh is still going to send a prophet who is like unto Moses and Elijah, who were very, very similar in their missions. And both of these themes come as a little tacked-on paragraph at the end of the Torah and at the end of the prophets. Come on. It's just intelligent life in the organization of your Bible. That's what this is. So somebody's trying to talk to you right here, and this is one of these other themes here that points forward. Dear reader, we're still waiting for the prophet who will come before the day of Yahweh and announce Yahweh's coming. Can you think of anybody in the New Testament who fits this description? Who's this? The Moses, Elijah-like prophet who goes to the wilderness and calls God's people back to the river and the whole deal. So John the Baptist. Did John think he was the Elijah? No. Did Jesus think John was the Elijah? Yes. Yep. Yeah. And actually, well, no, we're out of time. Sorry. So anyway, go read John chapter 1, and this will all come together for you. So there you go. So we'll do two more things as we close right here. So here we go. If you just look at the ending notes and the key poems that mark the Torah, and also key poems, throughout. So we had the poem in chapter 3 about the snake-crushing seed of the woman who would come, and then that was linked through the genealogy to the king from the line of Judah. And then you had, remember, Exodus 19, the poem about Yahweh making Israel a kingdom of priests for the nations. They totally failed at that in the wilderness, boom. But then at the center of Leviticus, Yahweh provided the Day of Atonement through these animal sacrifices. And so the whole of the heart of the Torah is about how can Yahweh be in covenant relationship with people whose hearts are selfish and rebellious. And the atonement of sin is the resolution of that kind of subplot tension in here. And then this larger plot theme is about the coming king from the line of Judah, from the tribe of Israel, and then the failure of Israel and how only the coming king and the renewal of Israel's hearts is going to be able to get the story back on track. And there you go. Like, you have all the themes in the Torah. You've got the Messiah coming. You have the promise from to Abraham to bless all nations through him. You have, the people are going to go into exile, but Moses promised that Yahweh would renew and circumcise the heart of his people so they could finally obey him one day. And in the meantime, he's given the sacrifices as this picture of Yahweh's desire to atone and cover over the sins of his people. You have the Exodus story, which is this image of Moses-like prophet conquering evil and leading the people through the waters into the new promised land. Luke chapter 9. Let's end not with the Torah, but with Luke chapter 9. Luke chapter 9, verse 28, and you can read it there, or I'll have it up here on the screen. About 8 days after Jesus said this thing from the previous story, Jesus took Peter, John, and James with him, and he went up onto a mountain to pray. As he was praying, the appearance of his face changed, and his clothes became bright, like a flash of lightning. And two men, Moses and Elijah, appeared in glorious splendor, talking with Jesus. Whoa, okay. They were speaking about what if you were just to happen in on a conversation between Jesus and Moses and Elijah? What would you find them talking about? Well, here's what they were chatting about. They were chatting about Jesus's, and the New International Version has here, his departure. Other translations in the room? They were talking about his exodus. Ooh, great. What translation is that? Oh, okay, the footnote. Any other translations in your main text? What's that? Decease? Oh, got it. Oh, interesting. That's an interesting interpretation. You may have a footnote, so the NIV does here. I know the ESV does. And they tell you, dear reader, the Greek word that Luke uses right here is the word exodus, which is a Greek word. They were talking about his exodus. Now, in English, that you would think, well, his departure, I guess maybe talking about his death, which on just within the narrative of Luke, that's where the story's going. But Luke uses a rich word right here to link Jesus to all, in my mind, to this whole network of themes right here, to the Elijah-like prophet so yes, John was the prophet who comes before, but then in another sense, Jesus is the ultimate Moses and Elijah-like prophet. And they're talking about the great Exodus. And Exodus isn't just about leaving, it evokes the whole story of Yahweh conquering evil and redeeming and freeing his people. And so, in my mind, this odd little story, I don't know what you have ever thought about this story of Jesus going up on a mountain, turning into a light bulb, and talking with Moses and Elijah. It's quite an odd story. But what Luke's doing here is he's linking Jesus as the glorified Messiah, as the one in whom all of these all point to him. They spoke about his exodus, which he was going to bring to fulfillment at Jerusalem. Isn't that an interesting line? He's going to bring the exodus to fulfillment. Peter and his companions were sleepy, but they were fully awake when this happened. They saw his glory and the two men standing with him. As the men were leaving Jesus, Peter said to him, "Man, Jesus, Lord, it's so good for us to be here. Let's build 3 tents, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah." Yeah, he had no clue what he was talking about in that moment. So whether he's sleepy or just stunned or whatever, he was just speaking nonsense. While he was speaking, a cloud appeared and covered them. They were afraid as they entered the cloud. Yeah, can you think of another mountain where a cloud came over the top? So Sinai, for Moses and for Elijah. A voice came from the cloud saying, "This is my son whom I've chosen. Listen to him." Can you think of another scene in the Gospels where a voice comes from the cloud saying, "This is my son whom I..." So it's the baptism scene. So all of these, Luke 9, dude, it's where all the money is. So Jesus is the Messiah. He's the chosen son. He's the prophet who needs to be listened to. He's the one who's come to accomplish the great Exodus, to redeem his people. And at the heart of the Exodus story is the Passover narrative of the lamb and the lamb's blood on the doorpost, which is this image of atonement and substitution. And somehow through all of this Jesus is going to bring God's people out of their long exile and transform their hearts so that they can become the vehicle through whom God finally blesses the nations. It just all comes right together right here in Luke chapter 9. So the Torah, I think we downgraded a bit when we call it the first 5 books of the Old Testament, because they're really the first 5 books about the new covenant, aren't they? So it's actually not the old covenant at all. It's a story about the new covenant. That's what the Torah is about, and about how the new covenant comes to its completion in Jesus, Messiah. I'll pray. Let me pray. Jesus, there is much that we do not understand, but man, thank you for just the beauty of the Scriptures, for the way that you have woven your promises and your grace and your commitment to us throughout history. And Jesus, we look to you with all of our hopes as the one in whom all of our greatest needs, our greatest failures, our greatest hopes, we set them all on you, Jesus. Thank you for your love for us, for living and dying and being raised on our behalf to fulfill your promises. Jesus, we want to follow you today as we go into our days. So we pray in your name. Amen? Yes. Amen. Cheers. Have a donut, because I think there's plenty. Oh, yes. If you want to know who is one of the most inspirational authors to me for everything Torah, it's a guy named John Sailhammer. And there are the three books. Pentateuch as narrative, it's a commentary on the Torah. The meaning of the Pentateuch, essays about how you go about reading a 2,000, 3,000-year-old text like the Pentateuch. And the NIV Compact Bible Commentary, which is a commentary by him on the entire Bible, paragraph by paragraph, that's in a little handy-dandy pocket form. John Sailhammer. I had him as a teacher, and because he taught here in Portland for a while, and then he moved on. But if you want to go further with a guide into the Torah, you can do no better right here, John Sailhammer. Cheers. It's been real. Sleep in next Wednesday. Just do yourself a favor, because that's what I'm going to be doing. So anyway, love you guys. This was a lot of fun.